In my idea, addiction is superpower untamed,
Yes.
as to say so.
It is, yes.
So,
It's the member of the family who unconsciously is being the hero and holding that family together and making sure they survive. I had chills and I thought, never in my life will I refer to somebody by the name of an organ or the name of a disease. We know that addiction always starts with massive or unresolved trauma, loss, grief, right? Unresolved grief. They felt that right from the beginning, the blame was removed, the shame was removed, and they had the energy for hope and to do their work.
here at the conference, I hear a lot about stigma.
Yes.
How would you define addiction without using the word addiction? Substance abuse, alcoholic, junkie, drug addict. How would you define it?
Well, I agree with you that we need to change language because we've started using some very bad language with, let me give you an example. When I was a very young medical student, I was 16, 17 years old, and I went for a grand rounds following the chairman into the ward, and the chief resident said to the chairman, "This is the liver in bed 7."
Oh my God.
And I had chills, and I thought, never in my life will I refer to somebody by the name of an organ or the name of a disease. Now, in the addiction field, we call people addicts.
Yes.
We don't call somebody with cancer the cancer.
Yeah.
We don't call the pneumonia the fracture. So when we use the name of the disease, it's blaming.
What is the reason? Why do you think that this is the situation that
the-
we call it by the disease?
Right. The only other diseases that we do that are asthma, we say the asthmatic, diabetic. Those are also chronic, long-term, relapsing diseases where people can have long patches of being healthy, right? But if you look at the way society views asthma and diabetes, obesity is one of the few things that someone will stop a fat person in the street and say, "Why don't you exercise? Why don't you eat better?" With asthma, they say, "Why do you go where you can, you can get your asthma?
Yeah.
Why don't you stay in a place where you're safe?" We blame people, and when we blame people for their disease, like diabetes, asthma, and addiction, we call them by the disease. Back in our great-grandmother's generation, they whispered about cancer, about death, about addiction. We couldn't do anything about them. Now with cancer, now there's so many cancers that are treatable, people don't whisper about it anymore. They don't hide that they're dealing with cancer.
So what
And
would
we
be
no
your
longer-
what would be your definition then?
Well-
What would be the proper way to express it? If we have to label it
Yes.
somehow, because it helps us adjust in the world.
In the States, we're now calling it substance use disorder.
But that doesn't sound too good.
Well, it's misusing substances, but it still is blaming because it's misusing.
Yes.
Suffering from the disease of. In the same way as we say, I'm suffering from pneumonia, I'm suffering from a head injury, suffering from addiction,
I'm suffering from loss of control.
from this disease. The minute you talk about an addict, you're talking about identifying the person with the disease. And any family dealing with a serious life-threatening illness they only talk about that person with the disease at the same time. They almost lose their identity. They become the disease. So the first thing we have to do is separate the person from the disease. They're suffering from this disease. Now they and the whole family can deal with this disease. It's not something that is part of them that is them. It's not their identifier. And I think it's more important than changing the word addiction is changing the identification of the person with the disease. So, for example, with cancer, we talk about, I am a cancer survivor. I've been a cancer survivor since the day I was first diagnosed and began treatment. With addiction, we say, I'm an addict in recovery. No, I am in recovery from addiction.
Yes, but it's very hard to identify with the person who is creating this massive pain around him or herself. How can I deal with this?
Well, let's look at the history of the family and let's look at what the addiction means in this generation. You know, let's see, where did it start? Well, we know that addiction always starts with massive or unresolved trauma, loss, grief, right? Unresolved grief. Let's go back and see where did the addiction in this family start. And I don't know if you've had a chance yet to listen to my TEDx talk.
No, not yet, unfortunately,
Okay.
but I will.
Yes, and you know, when I went back looking at families all over the world where the family was suffering from the disease of addiction and where they could follow their family back 5 to 7 generations, every single one, the addiction started from massive trauma loss. And it's a way of coping. The addiction, whether it's substances or gambling or eating disorder.
Sorry to interrupt you, it just
Yes.
came to my mind. When I'm labeling an addict, we don't call
Yes,
an addict.
someone
It's-
suffering from addiction.
Yes, basically that's a way how I cope with this.
Yes.
So if I'm a relative and I have somebody who is abusing substances,
Yes.
then for me it's a coping mechanism to say you're an addict.
But
because
what-
it's easier to label him
But-
rather than going back in the past and trying to dig down
Well,
deep.
the other part of it is that if you label him, it allows you not to look at yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what we do with Arise, we work to get everybody in the family healthy, because the first way of looking at the disease is it's not just one person. If we're calling him an addict, we've got to say the whole family is suffering from addiction. So what we want to do,
what do you love most in people who suffer from addiction as a disease?
that they're usually the ones who are carrying the grief on behalf of the whole family. They're the ones that each time they relapse, the whole family is brought together to stop the grieving. So they are the ones really saving the family from other people having to enact the grief.
That's an interesting point of view. So basically you're saying that addiction is saving the family.
Yes.
So addiction can save a family.
Yes. When people are dealing with severe grief and loss, that depression, that misery, they either find a way to deal with it, whether it's addiction, whether it's driving fast. You know, we have to find a way to deal with grief. Or they commit suicide. The ones who commit suicide, that family dies out. They're gone. The ones who deal with that grief with addiction, unless they're now with the opiates dying accidentally, that's the branch of the family that keeps going. And they also, every time they relapse, the behavioral problems involve the whole family. So a family that is separating out has to come together to deal with the problems. I think that the person suffering from addiction acts unconsciously. I don't believe it's a direct conscious decision. I'm going to save the family. I'm going to sacrifice myself. It's not a conscious thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's somehow one person in a family is identified and becomes the one who keeps them all together. You know?
I'm
Obviously,
asking-
their behavior when they're in addiction, when we are in addiction, our behavior is horrible, it's destructive, it creates more chaos.
In my idea, addiction is superpower untamed,
Yes.
as to say so.
It is, yes.
So
It's the member of the family who unconsciously is being the hero and holding that family together and making sure they survive.
So
Which
viewing
is
an
heroic.
addict as a hero,
As heroic, yes.
it's a heroic act. Well,
But
I
it's
don't
a self-sacrificial act done unconsciously. It's not a conscious decision.
No, I'm
the
just
last
shocked.
thing in the
I'm just
world
shocked
that
a
they
little
would
bit.
do.
I'm just thinking about this to see somebody suffering from addiction as a hero, or a,
Well, if you look at the story in the family, you'll find that family has been through something really bad, that they are falling apart, and that every time the person relapses, suddenly they're all there paying attention.
if I want to convince someone that your loved one has an addiction is basically a hero, how should I start?
I would not do that with a family at the beginning. What we do is we do a recovery message, which is looking at the family story, seeing what this family has survived, and say, you as a family, this is not the only problem. We know that even if they don't want to see that they have work to do, if you're living with somebody with addiction, everybody in the family is affected. Look at what you've been through in the past 2-3 generations. You guys are amazing. You're survivors, the whole family. Now, we always have a choice. We can look at the family strengths. What are the themes, the good things that come down your generations? And now, the other pole is the vulnerability. We have a choice. We can choose to take the strengths and the positive themes instead of the negative scripts to transmit to future generations,
I see.
right? To save this person and to prevent the future generations from having the same problem.
Families are willing to take part in this?
Absolutely. And they love it. One of the studies that was done very recently in Boston by Brandeis University looked back and interviewed 429 families who had been through ARISE at 2 hospitals in Massachusetts. And the families and the individuals praised the ARISE method. They felt that right from the beginning, the blame was removed, the shame was removed, and they had the energy for hope and to do their work. And they were all grateful for doing their own work, not just having the addicted individual do the work.
Which is the hardest part of this process? The most challenging part?
With some families, it's challenging to get them engaged. But we have, within 1 week, we have 60% of the families engaged. Within 2 weeks, 74%. Within 3 weeks, 82%, 83%. And in 6 months, 96%.
Well, what is the most common reason that they don't want to engage?
Usually it's a lack of knowledge, and it's before they...
No, but that can be
and-
fixed.
Exactly,
can
or
be fixed.
shame, or they're worried about having secrets exposed.
I see. So you deeply believe in human potential then?
Absolutely.
You see a human person as a chance?
Every human has an intrinsic capacity to heal.
So first
We're
you have
part
to
of the
believe
universe.
this.
Yeah, we're part of the universe. We heal. You
So
know?
there are only blocks that has to be moved away.
Absolutely.
Shame, guilt, and
Yeah. And secrets.
I experienced that in my addiction counseling profession, that they slowly give up out information and secrets, and you have to wait for it.
And if you have the whole family there, those secrets come out much more easily.
So thank you so much. most important question for all the addicts is, what's willpower?
For me, it's pretty simple. You understand what you have to do, you understand what's good for you, you understand what is the right thing for you to be in a better position.
This sounds so good. This is, excuse me, a psycho bullshit, but how does this work in a practical way?